June 6, 1944, Omaha Beach. The air is thick with smoke. The thunder of naval guns and the desperate struggle of the greatest generation fighting its way ashore. But offshore, amidst the vast Allied armada, a different kind of battle is about to begin. It will not be fought with heavy cannons or sophisticated fire control systems. It will be decided by one man, a weapon his comrades mocked, and a display of cool, calculated bravery that defied every expectation. This is the story of a sailor they laughed at for bringing a civilian hunting rifle to a world war. Pause, and how, in less than 30 minutes, his corner of the invasion fleet became a graveyard for the Luftwaffe. Narrator. Our story centers on the USS Corrie, a Gleaves-class destroyer. Designated DD-463, she was a workhorse of the Atlantic, sleek, fast, and armed to the teeth for anti-submarine and anti-aircraft warfare. Her crew, a mix of seasoned veterans and fresh-faced recruits, were tasked with a deadly serious mission: provide close fire support for the first waves of infantry hitting the Fox Green sector of Omaha Beach as dawn broke on D-Day. The Corrie was in the thick of it, her 5-inch guns roaring, shaking the very deck plates beneath the crew's feet. But among these sailors was a 21-year-old, gunner's mate 3rd class from Missouri John J. Parle, described as quiet, unassuming, and fiercely dedicated. Parle had a peculiar piece of personal gear stowed away. It wasn't government issue. It was a Winchester Model 74, 22 caliber, semi-automatic rifle, a rifle more suited for shooting squirrels in the woods back home than engaging enemy aircraft. He had purchased it through the Sears and Roebuck catalog before the war for about $22. To his fellow sailors it was a joke. A plinker. In the face of German Focke-Wulfs and Junkers, it was, in their eyes, utterly useless. They teased him. Why bring a .22 to a fight against armored bombers? But Parle kept it clean, maintained it meticulously, and had a sharpshooter's confidence. He believed in his rifle. The strategic situation was perilous. The Corrie was operating dangerously close to shore, dueling with German coastal batteries. The sky was a chaotic tapestry of Allied and German aircraft. While Allied air superiority was overwhelming, low-flying German fighters, particularly the agile Focke-Wulf FW-190s, would dart through the fleet, strafing decks and causing havoc. These hit-and-run attacks were deadly, and a destroyer's anti-aircraft suite, its 40mm Bofors and 20mm Oerlikon cannons, was designed for area saturation, not necessarily precision shots against fast-maneuvering targets. The stage was set for an unconventional threat and an even more unconventional defender. Narrator. At approximately 6:33 hours, disaster struck the Corrie. A violent explosion tore through her hull amidships. She had struck a mine or was hit by accurate shellfire. The exact cause remains debated. The result was catastrophic. The destroyer was broken in half, sinking rapidly. Survivors, including John Parle, abandoned ship into the frigid, choppy waters of the English Channel. Oil fires burned on the surface. Men were wounded, disoriented, and fighting for their lives in the heavy swell. The battle for the beach raged just yards away, but for the men of the Corrie, the fight had become a personal struggle for survival. Parle and a group of survivors managed to board a small, drifting assault boat. It was vulnerable, a sitting duck. And the Luftwaffe had not finished its work for the day. As the morning wore on, German aircraft, sensing opportunity, began to harass the rescue efforts. High above, the air crackled with the sound of engines and sporadic anti-aircraft fire from other ships. For the men in that small boat, each passing minute was an eternity of exposure. Their only weapons were their sidearms, and for John Parle, the waterproof bag containing his Winchester, .22 and a handful of magazines. By 0900 hours, the threat materialized from the low clouds over the French coast. Not the heavy bombers, but the Hunter's German fighter aircraft. First one, then another, peeling off to make strafing runs on the rescue craft and surviving life rafts dotting the water. The roar of their engines was deafening at close range, the chatter of their machine guns stitching lines of spray in the water. The men in the boats could only crouch low and pray. But Parle was not just praying, he was calculating. As an FW-190 screamed past, its pilot likely scanning for a target, Parle made a decision. He assembled his rifle. The teasing from his shipmates must have echoed in his mind, but his hands were steady. He loaded a magazine of 22 long rifle ammunition, tiny rounds, less than an inch long, designed for small game. To any observer, it was an act of futility. A gesture of defiance, perhaps, but not a legitimate military action. What happened next would rewrite the rules of naval engagement. The crisis was absolute. The survivors were in the water or on frail craft, utterly defenseless against strafing runs from some of the most advanced fighter planes of the war. The German pilots, emboldened by the chaos and the minimal return fire from the scattered survivors, began to make lower, slower passes, lining up their shots with grim precision. For the men in the water, many wounded from the sinking, this was a nightmare layered upon a nightmare. They had survived their ship's destruction, only to be methodically hunted from the air. On Paul's assault boat, fear was a tangible force. The whistle of a diving aircraft, the terrifying sight of the aircraft's nose lighting up with muzzle flashes, the impact of heavy machine gun rounds hitting the water or, worse, flesh and wood. It was a scenario designed to break men's spirits. They had no cover, no armor. Their fate rested entirely on the mercy of the enemy pilot or the distracted guns of a distant ship. In this moment of complete vulnerability, the very concept of fighting back seemed ludicrous. Then, a Focke-Wulf FW-190 lined up for another pass. It came in low, perhaps slower than before, the pilot confident this was the moment. The impossible moment. John Parle, standing in the rocking boat, raised his Winchester Model 74 to his shoulder. He was not aiming at the aircraft itself, shooting down a plane with a .22 by piercing its armor or hitting a vital component was 1,000,000 to 1 shot. But Parle, a hunter, understood a fundamental truth. The aircraft was a machine, but it was guided by a man, and that man was vulnerable. He took aim, not at the engine block or the wings, but at the canopy, at the pilot. He led the target, accounting for speed, wind, and the unstable platform beneath him. The crack of the .22 was pitifully small, lost in the cacophony of D-Day. It was the sound of a pop gun against the symphony of war. Pause, but on that first pass, witnesses saw something extraordinary. The German plane, after receiving no visible damage from any other source, suddenly wobbled, veered off its attack line, and did not return for another strafing run. It climbed away erratically. Had he hit the pilot? Was it a lucky shot? Or was it coincidence? The men around him barely had time to process it before another aircraft entered the fray. The battle was not over. Parle worked the semi-automatic action of his rifle. Eject a spent casing. Chamber a new round, breathe, lead the target, squeeze. He was a machine of focus in a sea of chaos. Another plane broke off its attack, then another. The German pilots, perhaps confused, perhaps realizing someone on that little boat was shooting back with uncanny accuracy, began to show more caution. But they kept coming. Parle kept shooting. The deck of that assault boat, slick with seawater and oil, became his personal firing range. The graveyard was beginning to take shape. Narrator. The turning point was not a single, cataclysmic event, but a relentless, almost surreal repetition. For a period estimated between 20 and 30 minutes, John Parle engaged multiple German aircraft. He wasn't firing wildly, he was picking his shots. The Winchester Model 74 held 14 rounds in its tubular magazine. He had spares, each .22 caliber bullet weighed only 40 grains. Its muzzle velocity was around 1,100 feet per second. Parle's strategy was one of precision harassment and lethal chance, a .22 round striking. The thick glass of the cockpit canopy could spiderweb it, obscuring the pilot's vision. A round hitting the thin aluminum skin of the fuselage near the cockpit could create a distracting ping or ricochet. And yes, a round could find its way through an opening, a ventilation port, or a gap in the armor plating. A tiny piece of lead, traveling with enough force, could wound or even kill a pilot. This was the desperate calculus of his defense. Witness accounts from other survivors, gathered later, would tell a consistent story. They saw Parle exposed and standing tall, firing round after round. They saw enemy aircraft that had been lining up to strafe their positions suddenly peel away and not return. The official assessment, based on these observations and the patterns of the attacks, would later credit him with damaging or driving off at least 7 German aircraft that morning, 7 with a mail order .22, pause. Imagine the perspective of those German pilots. You are flying one of the war's finest fighters. You are attacking defenseless survivors in the water. Then from a small boat you see muzzle flashes. But there is no tracers arcing toward you, no explosive shells, just the faintest flicker, and then perhaps a tink against your canopy or a sudden, shocking impact in your cockpit. It would have been confusing, terrifying. Was it a new, secret Allied weapon, a sniper? The psychological effect of this unexpected, precise, and inexplicable return fire was as valuable as any physical damage. Parle, through sheer audacity and skill, had created a no-fly zone around his patch of the ocean. Narrator, the attacks eventually ceased. The surviving crew of the USS Corey were rescued by other vessels, including the destroyer USS Fitch. 24 of their shipmates had been lost in the sinking and the subsequent attacks. John Parle's actions, witnessed by dozens, immediately became the stuff of legend within the fleet. The man with the toy rifle had done the impossible. But tragedy would strike a final, cruel blow. Later on D-Day, while assisting with rescue and transfer operations between small boats, John Parle encountered a smoke-potted device used to generate screening smoke that had accidentally ignited on one of the landing craft. Recognizing the immediate danger it posed to the craft, which was laden with wounded and explosives, he rushed to grab the smoking pot. He intended to hurl it overboard. In doing so, he inhaled a massive amount of toxic phosphorus smoke. He succeeded in saving the craft and its occupants, but the damage to his lungs was catastrophic. He was evacuated but died of his injuries several days later, on July 17, 1944. For his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity on D-Day, Gunner S. Mate, 3rd Class John Joseph Parle was posthumously awarded the United States' highest military decoration, the Medal of Honor. His citation specifically mentions his use of the small arms weapon to drive off enemy aircraft, his valued service in aiding his commander after the sinking, and his final, fatal act of courage in seizing the smoke pot. The boy from Omaha, Nebraska, who went to war with a catalog rifle, had become a symbol of ingenuity, courage, and self-sacrifice. His legacy is one of defiant spirit. The USS Parle, the 708, a destroyer escort, was named in his honor. But more importantly, his story endures as a powerful reminder that in the vast, mechanized horror of total war, the individual still matters. That one man's skill, courage, and unorthodox thinking could, for a brief, shining, and bloody half-hour, hold a piece of the sky at bay. He proved that heroism is not defined by the weapon you are issued, but by the will with which you use it. Narrator, the actions of John Parle on June 6, 1944, stand as a unique and awe-inspiring chapter in the annals of military history. It is a story of mockery turned to mastery, of a humble tool wielded with devastating effect. Pause. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to World War II Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.